All right, let's jump straight into it. Today, we're unpacking one of the most defining and honestly devastating conflicts in human history, the First World War. Now, right off the bat, the source material throws this fascinating yet terrifying concept at us: total war. What does that actually mean? Well, it means the entire population and absolutely all of a nation's resources had to be mobilized just to try and win. We're not just talking about armies fighting armies here. This was literally societies fighting societies. In this explainer, we're going on a journey from the macro to the micro. We're going to start way up high in the war rooms with commanders drawing lines on maps, and then we're going to travel all the way down into the freezing, muddy quagmire of the trenches.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, the key figures of the war. Second, the impact of their strategies and decisions. Third, the harsh daily life in the trenches. And fourth, the deadliest weapons on the front.
Starting off with Section 1, Key Figures of the War.
Right, so we've got a stark contrast between two absolute monumental figures here. On one side, we have Field Marshal Ferdinand Foch. By that pivotal year of 1918, Foch had become the commander-in-chief of all Allied forces on the Western Front. His job? To unify the British, the French, and eventually the American forces into a single, cohesive shield. No small task, right? But on the flip side, we have General Erich Ludendorff of Germany. Ludendorff was the mastermind, the architect behind this massive German push in 1918. It was a desperate, all-out gamble to just win the war before American numbers could overwhelm them. So really, these two men represent this ultimate clash of wills at the absolute highest level of command.
Moving on to Section 2, the impact of strategy and decisions.
When you look at the progression of the war, you see this constant, almost relentless attempt by these commanders to outmaneuver one another just to break the deadlock. For instance, in December 1915, Field Marshal Douglas Haig becomes commander-in-chief of the British Expeditionary Force, and as the war just grinds on through these horrific battles of attrition, we fast-forward to March 1918. As we just mentioned, Foch takes supreme command of the Allies. But at that exact same time, from March right through July of 1918, the Ludendorff offensive is unleashed. This was a series of massive German attacks intended to just end the whole thing. The timing here perfectly illustrates how action and reaction at that command level really define the Great War.
So that brings up a really crucial point. What actually happens when these grand strategies fail? Our sources point out the failure of these early sweeping strategies like Germany's Schlieffen Plan. When that plan failed to secure a quick victory in 1914, the war didn't just end, it dug in, literally. This failure birthed the infamous trench system. In that reaction to the stalemate, it created a literal and metaphorical deadlock on the Western Front. You had commanders looking at maps showing static lines that barely moved for years, despite costing millions of lives.
Which brings us to Section 3, harsh daily life in the trenches.
Take a look at these soldiers in their pith helmets, just casually resting, having a drink from barrels in a field. I mean, it looks almost peaceful, doesn't it? Just a brief, momentary respite. But I really want you to hold on to this image of humanity and calm, because it provides this stark, frankly heartbreaking contrast to the terrifying realities these exact same men were about to march straight into.
Because the first reality they faced was no man's land. The glossary of our source defines this pretty simply as the land between the opposing sides' trenches. But we know it was so much worse than that. It was a terrifying, impassable wasteland of cratered earth, barbed wire, and death. It was the actual physical manifestation of the general's deadlock, a space that trapped literally millions of men in a static nightmare.
And sitting in those trenches, just staring out at no man's land day after day, it took an unimaginable toll on the human mind. The term shell shock actually emerged during this war. It refers to the severe psychological trauma caused by constant, deafening artillery bombardments. Imagine being subjected to explosions that didn't stop for days or even weeks. It just shattered their nerves entirely. It was a huge hidden casualty of this static warfare.
And the physical horrors? Just as inescapable. Trench foot was a condition caused by prolonged exposure to wet, swampy conditions. Men would stand in freezing, muddy water for days on end without even being able to change their boots. This led to the literal rotting of their limbs, which often required amputation. It's just horrific to even think about.
And it doesn't stop there. Soldiers were also facing trench fever, dysentery, and gangrene. You see, enemy fire wasn't the only killer on the Western Front, not by a long shot. The unsanitary, cramped, and disease-ridden environment of the trench system meant a soldier was constantly fighting for his life against microscopic enemies, all while just sitting there, waiting for the whistle to go over the top.
Which leads us to a massive,
Really dramatic question. How do you break an unbreakable stalemate? I mean, if the soldiers can't cross no man's land, and the diseases and artillery are just bleeding armies dry, what changes? Well, the answer, unfortunately for the men on the ground, was a terrifying technological escalation.
That brings us to our final section, the deadliest weapons on the front.
Basically, the battlefield rapidly transformed into an industrial slaughterhouse. The new deadliest weapons on the front included things the world had barely ever seen or never seen in large-scale combat. We're talking aircraft flying overhead for reconnaissance and combat, machine guns that could mow down entire lines of infantry in seconds, poison gas, tanks, and massive, unprecedented artillery barrages. These weren't just new tools, right? They completely changed the fundamental nature of warfare.
Let's actually look at how this escalation unfolded step by step. In April 1915, we see the first use of poison gas on the Western Front. This was a horrifying, invisible weapon designed to clear out trenches. Then, by August 1916, tacticians developed the creeping artillery barrage, basically a moving wall of explosive fire that slowly advanced just ahead of the marching infantry. And then, September 1916, the debut of tanks. Each of these steps was a desperate, highly calculated attempt to finally cross the quagmire of no man's land.
And eventually, these technologies really began to find their terrible footing. As noted in the source's timeline, November 1917 marked a highly significant moment, the successful massed tank attack at the Battle of Cambrai. By deploying this brand new armor technology en masse, commanders finally saw a glimpse of how this grinding trench deadlock could actually be broken through mechanized force.
But as we pull our view back from those specific battles, we are left with a pretty profound contrast. On one hand, you have the commander's map. Clean lines, grand strategies, guys like Foch and Ludendorff moving abstract pieces around a board to break a stalemate. On the other hand, you have the soldier's reality. Mud, dysentery, shell shock, and facing down poison gas and machine gun fire.
It leaves us with a really provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. When total war demands the complete mobilization of a society, and when commanders' failed plans push technology to its absolute deadliest limits, who truly pays the ultimate price for those strategies? The maps may belong to the generals, but the quagmire belonged entirely to the soldiers. Thanks for joining me to explore this today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.